The old camera sat in a velvet-lined box, forgotten for nearly 3 years. It had belonged to Queen Elizabeth, a personal gift from Prince Philip decades ago. Now, in the quiet halls of Windsor Castle, a young archivist named Thomas carefully lifted it from storage. His hands trembled slightly. This wasn't just any camera. It was the Queen's most private possession, the one she used to document family moments. No one else was allowed to see. Thomas had been tasked with cataloging the late Queen's personal effects. It was an honor, but also heavy with responsibility. He turned the camera over in his hands. It was silver, elegant, surprisingly modern for something the Queen had used. A small green light blinked on the side. His heart skipped. The battery still had charge. He pressed a button. The screen flickered to life. What he saw next made his blood run cold. The footage was grainy, but clear enough. Dated just 2 weeks before the Queen's passing. The timestamp read 11:47 p.m. The location appeared to be a private corridor in Balmoral Castle. Thomas leaned closer to the screen, his breath catching in his throat. There, in the dim hallway, stood Camilla. She was not alone. A man in a dark uniform stood beside her. Not a royal guard. Thomas knew every face in the royal protection detail. This man was someone else. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a scar running down his left cheek. The two were speaking in hushed tones, glancing over their shoulders as if checking for witnesses. Camilla handed the man an envelope, thick, sealed with red wax. The man opened it just enough to peer inside. Then he nodded, slipped it into his jacket, and disappeared down the corridor without another word. Thomas's mind raced. What had he just seen? Why would the Queen have filmed this? And more importantly, why had she never told anyone? He rewound the footage and watched it again and again. Each time the same uneasy feeling settled in his stomach. This wasn't normal. This wasn't protocol. This was something else entirely. If you're hooked already, make sure you're subscribed. This story is going to take you places you never expected. Trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next. Thomas knew he had to be careful. You don't just walk into Buckingham Palace with accusations about the Queen Consort. Not without proof. Not without a plan. But this footage, this camera, it was proof. Or at least, it was the beginning of something much larger. He copied the video file onto a secure drive and locked the camera back in its case. His mind spun with questions. Who was the man in the corridor? What was in that envelope? And why had Queen Elizabeth been recording in secret? That night, Thomas couldn't sleep. He lay in his small flat in London, staring at the ceiling, replaying the footage in his mind. The way Camilla had looked over her shoulder, the way the man had moved, quick and silent like a shadow. It all felt wrong. By morning, Thomas had made a decision. He would dig deeper, quietly, carefully. He would find out who that man was. And he would discover what Queen Elizabeth had been trying to protect, even in her final days. But Thomas had no idea what he was about to uncover, or how dangerous the truth really was. Thomas returned to Windsor Castle the next morning with a mission. He needed answers, but he couldn't ask directly. Not yet. Instead, he focused on the camera itself. Perhaps there was more footage. Perhaps the Queen had recorded other moments, other secrets. He signed out the camera again, this time requesting privacy in one of the archive rooms. The staff didn't question him. Archivists were often meticulous, sometimes obsessive. It was expected. He scrolled through the camera's memory. Most of the files were exactly what you'd expect. Family gatherings, garden parties, Prince Philip laughing at something off camera, grandchildren playing in the summer sun, normal, beautiful, innocent. But then he found another file, hidden in a subfolder labeled Private Notes. This footage was different, darker. The timestamp showed it was recorded 5 months before the Queen's death. The setting was a small sitting room, one Thomas didn't immediately recognize. The Queen herself was in the frame this time, sitting in a high-backed chair. Her expression grave, she was speaking directly into the camera, her voice was steady. But there was something in her eyes. Fear, or perhaps resolve. If you are watching this, she said, then something has happened. something I hope to prevent." She paused, folding her hands in her lap. "There are forces at work within this family that I can no longer control. People I trusted have made choices that threaten everything we have built." Thomas's heart pounded. He glanced at the door to make sure no one was coming. The Queen continued. "I have documented what I could. The meetings, the exchanges, lies. I do not know who to turn to anymore. Those closest to me, those who should protect this institution, have become part of the problem." She looked directly into the lens, as if she could see Thomas. As if she knew someone would find this one day. "If you have found this recording, please, be careful. Trust no one in the inner circle. And whatever you do, do not let them erase what I've uncovered." The video ended abruptly. Thomas sat frozen, his mind reeling. The Queen had known. She had known something was wrong, and she had been documenting it. But what exactly had she uncovered? And who was she referring to? He thought back to the footage of Camilla and the rogue guard. Was that what the Queen had been investigating? Or was it just one piece of a much larger puzzle? Thomas needed help. But the Queen's warning echoed in his mind. Trust no one in the inner circle. That ruled out most of the palace staff. It ruled out the royal family entirely. He thought of Margaret, an investigative journalist he had met years ago at a university lecture. She was fierce, independent, and most importantly, she had no loyalty to the palace. She would help him. She had to. That evening, Thomas met Margaret at a small cafe in Camden. It was loud, crowded, the kind of place where conversations disappeared into the noise. He showed her the footage on his phone, the screen tilted away from prying eyes. Margaret's expression shifted as she watched, from curiosity to shock to something darker. Determination. "You know what this means, don't you?" she said, her voice low. "That someone in the royal family is hiding something," Thomas replied. "No," Margaret said, leaning forward. "It means someone in the royal family is involved in something criminal, and the Queen knew about it." Thomas swallowed hard. He hadn't wanted to say it out loud, but hearing Margaret confirm it made it real. Terrifyingly real. "We need to find out who that man is," Margaret said. "The one in the corridor with Camilla. If we can identify him, we can start to piece this together." Thomas nodded. "I'll go through the palace security logs. See if I can find anything unusual from that night." Margaret's eyes narrowed. "Be careful. If the Queen was right, if people inside the palace are involved, then you're already at risk." Thomas felt a chill run down his spine. He thought of the Queen's words. Trust no one, but he had already made his choice. He couldn't turn back now. Asterisk, the security logs were a maze. Thomas had access to the archives, but only to certain sections. Personnel files, visitor records, maintenance schedules. Anything related to active security protocols was locked behind clearance levels he didn't have. But Thomas was patient and resourceful. He started with the visitor logs from Balmoral, the 2 weeks leading up to the Queen's death. Hundreds of names. Staff, family, dignitaries, maintenance crews. He cross-referenced each one with known royal protection officers. Most matched. But 3 names stood out. External contractors, listed under a state security consultation. One name in particular caught his eye. Victor Rains. No photograph. No background information. Just a clearance stamp and a date that matched the night of the footage. Thomas wrote the name down and tucked the paper into his jacket. He needed to move carefully now. If someone was watching the logs, if someone noticed him digging, it could all unravel. That evening, Margaret called him. Her voice was tight, urgent. "I found something," she said. Victor Rains. He's not just a contractor. He's a former intelligence officer. Worked for MI5 in the 90s. Left under questionable circumstances. After that, he went private. Very private. Thomas's stomach twisted. "What does that mean?" "It means," Margaret said slowly, "that he's the kind of person you hire when you need something done quietly, and often illegally." "Why would Camilla be meeting with someone like that?" Thomas asked, though part of him already knew the answer. "That's what we need to find out," Margaret replied. But Thomas, listen to me. If this man is involved, if he's connected to what the Queen was investigating, then you are in real danger. These people don't leave loose ends. Thomas felt his pulse quicken. He thought of the Queen's final words. Be careful. Trust no one. I'm going back to Windsor tomorrow, he said. There's more footage. I know there is. The Queen wouldn't have recorded just those 2 clips. She was building a case. Margaret hesitated. Then I'm coming with you. No, Thomas said firmly. If something happens to me, someone needs to know the truth. You're my insurance. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Fine, Margaret said finally. But you check in with me every 2 hours. And if I don't hear from you, I'm going public with everything we have. Thomas agreed and hung up. He stared at his phone, the weight of it suddenly heavy in his hand. Everything was moving faster now. Too fast. The next morning, Thomas arrived at Windsor Castle just after dawn. The halls were quiet, still dim with the early light. He made his way to the archive room, his footsteps echoing on the stone floors. But when he reached the door, he froze. It was already open. The lock had been forced. The velvet box where the Queen's camera had been stored was gone. Thomas's heart hammered in his chest. He stepped inside, scanning the room. Papers were scattered across the desk. Drawers had been pulled open, their contents spilled onto the floor. Someone had been looking for something, and they had found it. He grabbed his phone and called Margaret. No answer. He tried again. Still nothing. Panic surged through him. He turned to leave, but a voice stopped him cold. Looking for something, Mr. Thomas? A man stood in the doorway, tall, broad-shouldered, a scar running down his left cheek. Victor Raines. Thomas's blood turned to ice. He backed up slowly, his mind racing for an escape, but there was none. The windows were barred. The only exit was blocked. Victor stepped into the room, his expression calm, almost bored. The Queen was a clever woman, he said, his voice low and smooth, but even she didn't understand how deep this went. And now, neither will you. Thomas's hand fumbled for his phone, but Victor was faster. He crossed the room in 2 strides and knocked it from Thomas's grip. It clattered to the floor, the screen shattering on impact. Let's make this simple, Victor said. You're going to tell me where the backup files are? And then you're going to forget you ever saw that camera? Thomas's mind spun. Backup files. He hadn't made backup files. The only copy was on the secure drive in his flat. But if he told Victor that, it would lead him straight to Margaret. I don't know what you're talking about, Thomas said, his voice shaking. Victor smiled. It was not a kind smile. Then I suppose we'll have to do this the hard way. Victor grabbed Thomas by the collar and shoved him against the wall. The impact knocked the breath from Thomas's lungs. His vision blurred for a moment, then focused again on the cold eyes staring back at him. You have no idea what you've stumbled into, Victor said. This isn't some palace scandal. This is survival. And right now, you're on the wrong side of it. Thomas gasped for air. The Queen knew. She recorded everything. You can't erase it. Victor's expression didn't change. The Queen is dead. And soon, her little investigation will be too. He released Thomas, letting him slide down the wall. Thomas's legs trembled as he tried to steady himself. His mind raced. He needed to buy time. He needed to think. What was in the envelope? Thomas asked, his voice hoarse. What did Camilla give you? Victor paused. For a moment, something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, maybe. Or amusement. You really don't know, do you? He said. He pulled a chair from the desk and sat down, as if they were having a casual conversation. The envelope contained documents, financial records, transactions that certain members of the royal family would prefer stay buried. Thomas's heart sank. What kind of transactions? The kind that fund things, Victor said simply. Private security, offshore accounts, payments to people who make problems disappear. He leaned forward. The kind of transactions that keep a family this powerful in control. Thomas felt sick. And Camilla? She's a facilitator, Victor said. Nothing more. She ensures the money moves where it needs to go. Keeps everything clean, or at least she tries to. But the Queen found out, Thomas said. Victor nodded slowly. Elizabeth was smarter than anyone gave her credit for. She started noticing discrepancies, questions that shouldn't have been asked. She began investigating on her own, quietly, carefully, but not carefully enough. The implication hung in the air like a blade. You're saying someone killed her? Thomas whispered. Victor stood, his shadow falling over Thomas. I'm saying the Queen was old, and old people die. Sometimes nature takes its course. Sometimes nature gets a little help. Thomas's stomach turned. He thought of the Queen's final message. The fear in her eyes. She had known. She had known they were coming for her. Who ordered it? Thomas demanded, his voice rising. Was it Camilla? Was it Charles? Victor laughed. A cold, hollow sound. You think this is about one person? This is about an institution, system. The crown doesn't survive for 1,000 years by being merciful. It survives by being ruthless. He moved toward the door, then stopped. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to leave this room. You're going to go back to your little flat. And you're going to forget everything you saw. Because if you don't, if you try to go public, if you even whisper a word of this to anyone, I will make sure you disappear. Just like the others who got too close. Thomas's blood ran cold. What others? Victor didn't answer. He simply walked out, leaving the door open behind him. Thomas sat on the floor, his whole body shaking. He had to get out of here. He had to warn Margaret. But more than that, he had to finish what the Queen had started. He pulled himself to his feet and stumbled out of the archive room. The castle was still quiet, the morning shift just beginning. No one noticed him as he slipped through the halls and out into the courtyard. His phone was destroyed. No, but he remembered Margaret's address. He flagged down a cab and gave the driver directions, glancing over his shoulder every few seconds to see if he was being followed. When he arrived at Margaret's flat, he pounded on the door. No answer. He tried the handle. Unlocked. His heart sank. Inside, the flat was ransacked. Furniture overturned. Papers scattered everywhere. And in the center of the room, Margaret's laptop smashed to pieces. But no Margaret. Thomas's mind raced. Had Victor gotten to her? Was she already gone? Or had she escaped? He searched the flat frantically, looking for any sign, any clue. Then he saw it. A note tucked under a broken picture frame. It was in Margaret's handwriting. Just 2 words, go public. Thomas's hands trembled as he held the note. She was alive. She had to be. And she was telling him to finish this. To expose everything, no matter the cost. But how? Victor had taken the camera. He'd destroyed the evidence. All Thomas had left was his word. And in a battle against the crown, his word meant nothing, unless there was more. Thomas thought back to the Queen's message. The hidden folder. The private notes. She had said she documented everything, which meant there had to be more footage. More evidence. Hidden somewhere Victor hadn't found yet. He thought of the Queen's private quarters at Buckingham Palace. The places only she had access to. The rooms that had been sealed since her death. That was where the answers were. That was where the truth was buried. And Thomas was going to find it. Asterisk, getting into Buckingham Palace was one thing. Getting into the Queen's private quarters was another. Thomas spent the rest of the day planning. He knew the palace layout by heart. Years of archival work had given him access to blueprints, floor plans, security rotations. But the Queen's private rooms had been locked down since her death. Only senior staff and members of the royal family were allowed inside. He would have to break in. That night, Thomas waited until the palace was at its quietest. Just after 2 in the morning, when the night shift guards were at their most tired, their most careless, he entered through a service entrance he knew was often left unsecured, small oversight in an otherwise fortress-like building. The halls were dark, lit only by the occasional wall sconce. Thomas moved carefully, keeping to the shadows, his heart pounding so loud he was sure someone would hear it. He reached the queen's wing and paused. A single guard stood outside the main entrance, his posture stiff, alert. Thomas couldn't go through him. He would have to find another way. He remembered the servants' passages. Narrow corridors built into the walls, used by staff to move unseen through the palace. They were old, dusty, rarely used anymore, but they connected to almost every room. Thomas found the entrance behind a tapestry and slipped inside. The passage was cramped, the air stale. He used his phone's flashlight to navigate, careful not to make a sound. After what felt like an eternity, he found the access panel that led into the queen's sitting room. He pushed it open slowly, wincing as the hinges creaked. The room was exactly as she had left it. Personal photographs on the mantel, a half-finished book on the side table, a teacup, long cold, still sitting on a coaster. It felt wrong to be here, like trespassing on sacred ground, but Thomas pushed the feeling aside. He had a job to do. He searched the room methodically. Drawers, shelves, behind picture frames. Under furniture, nothing. Then he noticed the writing desk in the corner. It was antique, ornate.
Wow.
With small, hidden compartments he'd read about in historical records, he ran his fingers along the edges, pressing gently until he felt something give. A panel slid open, revealing a small space inside there. Tucked away was a USB drive. Thomas's hand shook as he pulled it out. It was labeled in the queen's handwriting. The truth. He pocketed the drive and turned to leave. But then he heard footsteps in the hallway outside. Fast, deliberate. Someone knew he was here. Thomas's mind raced. He couldn't go back through the passage. It was too slow. He needed another exit. He scanned the room and saw a door leading to a balcony. It was a long drop to the garden below, but there was a trellis. He could climb down. He ran to the balcony and swung his leg over the railing just as the door to the sitting room burst open. Victor stood in the doorway, his expression dark with fury. "You really are a fool," he said, drawing a gun from his jacket. Thomas didn't think. He jumped. His hands caught the trellis, the wood digging into his palms. He scrambled down as fast as he could, splinters tearing into his skin. Behind him, he heard Victor shouting, but no gunshot. He couldn't risk firing inside the palace. Too much noise. Thomas hit the ground hard, pain shooting through his ankle. He limped toward the garden wall, adrenaline drowning out the agony. He heard the balcony door slam open above him. Victor was coming. Thomas pushed himself harder, vaulting over the low garden wall and into the street beyond. He flagged down a passing taxi and threw himself inside. "Drive," he gasped. "Just drive." The driver, startled but compliant, pulled away from the curb. Thomas looked back through the rear window. Victor stood on the street, watching the taxi disappear into the night. His face was unreadable. But Thomas knew. This wasn't over. Thomas directed the driver to a 24-hour internet cafe in East London. He paid in cash and found a computer in the back corner, away from prying eyes. He plugged in the USB drive. The files loaded slowly. Videos, documents, audio recordings. The Queen had been thorough, obsessively thorough. Thomas clicked on the first video. It was dated 6 months before her death. The Queen was in her study, speaking into the camera. "I have confirmed the payments," she said. £12 million, funneled through offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. The money was used to silence witnesses, to pay off investigators, to ensure that certain truths never saw the light of day. She paused, her expression heavy. "My son is involved. Charles has known for years. And Camilla, she is the one who manages the logistics. She ensures the payments are made. The records are erased." Thomas felt his blood turn cold. "But there's more," the Queen continued. "I've discovered that these payments are not just about protecting the family's reputation. They're about covering up crimes. Real crimes, abuse, corruption, even ... She hesitated. "Even murder." The video ended. Thomas sat back, his mind reeling. This was it. This was the proof. The Queen had documented everything, and now it was in his hands. He had to get this out. He had to go public. But first, he had to make sure Margaret was safe. Thomas uploaded the files to 3 separate encrypted cloud accounts. Then he emailed copies to 5 different journalists, including Margaret's colleagues at major news outlets. If something happened to him, the truth would still get out. But finding Margaret was his priority now. He called her number from a payphone. After 6 rings, she answered, "Thomas." Her voice was shaky, breathless. "Where are you?" "I'm safe." "Are you?" "I'm at a hotel in Brighton," she said. "I left the moment I saw them watching my flat. I knew they'd come for me." Relief flooded through him. "I found it. The Queen's files. Everything. I've sent them to the press. It's going to break within hours." There was a pause. Then Margaret spoke, her voice tight. "Thomas, you need to hear something. I did some digging on Victor Reigns. He doesn't work alone. He's part of a network. Ex-intelligence. Private contractors. They've been cleaning up messes for the royals for decades." Thomas felt the weight of her words settle over him. How many people are involved? Dozens. Maybe more. Politicians, media owners, judges. This goes deeper than just the family, Thomas. This is institutional. Thomas leaned against the payphone booth, exhaustion crashing over him. Then what do we do? How do we fight that? "We don't," Margaret said. "We let the truth fight for us. Once those files go public, once people see what the Queen recorded, there's no putting it back in the box. They can't silence everyone." She was right. The files were out there now, in the hands of people who wouldn't back down, people who cared more about the truth than their own safety. "Meet me in Brighton," Thomas said. "We wait this out together," agreed. "But Thomas, watch your back. They won't stop until they find you." He hung up and started walking. The streets of London were empty at this hour. The city, holding its breath in the space between night and dawn. Thomas thought about the Queen, about her final days, recording everything, knowing she was running out of time. She had been brave, braver than anyone knew, and now, because of her, the truth was finally coming to light. By the time Thomas reached Brighton, the sun was rising. Margaret met him at the hotel, and together they watched the news on a small television in her room. The headlines started slowly. A leak. Allegations of royal financial misconduct. But within an hour, the story exploded. Major news outlets around the world picked it up. The Queen's recordings were verified, her voice unmistakable. Her evidence damning, the palace issued a statement denying everything. But it was too late. The public had seen the videos. They had heard the Queen's own words, and they were demanding answers. Calls for investigations echoed across Parliament. Protests gathered outside Buckingham Palace. The Crown, for the first time in centuries, was truly vulnerable. Thomas and Margaret watched in stunned silence as the world they knew began to crumble. "Do you think they'll come after us?" Thomas asked quietly. Margaret considered the question. "Maybe, but not in the way they used to. The world is watching now. They can't make us disappear without consequences." Thomas nodded. He thought of Victor Reigns, of the men in the shadows. They were still out there, still dangerous, but their power had been broken. The Queen had seen to that. Days turned into weeks. The investigations began. High-ranking officials were questioned. Financial records were seized, and slowly, piece by piece, the truth emerged. Charles's involvement was undeniable. He had authorized payments. He had covered up scandals. He had protected abusers within the palace walls. The public turned on him. Calls for his abdication grew louder with each passing day. Camilla went into seclusion. Her name was dragged through every newspaper, every broadcast. The woman who had managed the payments, the facilitator, the one who had met with Victor Reigns in secret, and Victor himself, he vanished, disappeared into the same shadows he had emerged from. But Thomas knew men like him never truly disappeared. They just waited, watched, bided their time, but the crown itself, it would survive. It always did. Damaged, yes. Weakened, certainly. But institutions this old, this powerful, they knew how to endure. Still, something had changed. The veil had been lifted. The secrets exposed. And because of one brave woman and her camera, the world would never look at the royal family the same way again. Thomas and Margaret eventually returned to London. They were different now, changed by what they had seen, what they had survived. Thomas went back to his work as an archivist, but he never forgot the Queen's final message. Be careful. Trust no one. And most importantly, never stop searching for the truth. Because in the end, the truth was all that mattered. And as Thomas filed away the last of the Queen's personal effects, he found one more item. A small note, handwritten, tucked into the lining of the velvet camera box. It read simply, "Thank you for being brave." Thomas folded the note carefully and placed it in his pocket. A reminder, a promise, that some battles are worth fighting. Some truths are worth dying for. And some legacies, like Queen Elizabeth's, live on long after the final breath is taken.